Do you think you're a visual learner, or that you're right-brained creative? What if I told you that those labels are holding you back? Let's dive into the surprising truth about how your brain really works. Get ready to unlearn everything you thought you knew about learning. Here are 3 popular myths about learning debunked with neuroscience. All right, let's start by talking about one of the most popular myths in education. The brain stops developing in adulthood. To do that, let's first talk about how learning actually happens in the brain. When we talk about learning, we're really discussing neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life. Neuroplasticity is not just something that happens when we're kids. It's a process that continues for as long as we're alive. Let's break it down in a way that's simple to understand. Think of your brain as a massive network of roads. Every time you learn something new, your brain builds a new road or strengthens an old one. When you practice something, whether it's solving a maths problem, playing a sport, or learning a new language, you're making that road smoother and easier to travel. This is what Judy Willis describes as pathways through the forest. With practice, those pathways become more defined and easier to follow. The brain's greatest potential for growth is its ability to keep changing. Now, what happens to roads you don't use? They start to fade away. This is what scientists call synaptic pruning. It's the brain's way of cleaning up and focusing energy on the connections you actually use. But here's the cool part. At any age, you can build new roads and strengthen old ones. This is why learning something new, even as an adult, is absolutely possible. In adulthood, we tend to use neuroplasticity more intentionally. For example, activities like solving puzzles, learning a musical instrument, or even practicing mindfulness help build those brain pathways. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa refers to this as adaptive expertise. It's about focusing on the things we care about or need to improve, and the brain responds by creating or strengthening the connections needed. And it's not just about mental activities. Your environment matters too. Engage in meaningful social interactions, trying new things, or staying physically active can all stimulate the brain. Ken Purnell highlights the power of lifelong learning environments, whether it's through formal education or hobbies. These activities keep the brain flexible and ready to adapt. Lifelong learning environments enhance neuroplasticity and sustain cognitive vitality. So let's dissect the myth. Why do you think people think brain stops developing into adulthood? Well, early researchers believed that once you reached a certain age, your brain's ability to change dropped off dramatically. But now we know that's just not true. The brain remains adaptable, it just works a bit differently as we age. For kids, the brain is like wet cement, ready to form any shape. For adults, it's more like hardened clay. You can still reshape it, but it just takes more effort and intentionality. This is why learning something new, like a new language, might feel harder as an adult, but it's absolutely possible with practice and persistence. What about aging? Let's talk about aging. It's true that the brain changes as we get older. Things like processing speed might slow down, and it might take a bit longer to remember certain details, but that doesn't mean learning stops. Research shows that older adults who stay mentally and physically active maintain and even improve their cognitive abilities. This can be as simple as picking up a new hobby, playing strategy games, or staying socially connected. Regular exercise also plays a big role. It increases blood flow to the brain, which helps maintain the health of brain cells and even encourages the growth of new ones. Key takeaway: the idea that the brain stops developing in adulthood is outdated. Neuroplasticity is a lifelong process, and your brain is always capable of change. Whether you're 16 or 60, learning something new, staying active, and challenging yourself will keep your brain growing. So don't let this myth hold you back. The science is clear. It's never too late to learn and grow. Myth 2. Learning styles improve academic outcomes. Okay, so also a very popular myth in education, learning styles. You've probably heard someone say, I'm a visual learner, or I can only learn by listening. It sounds convincing. The idea is that if you teach students in their preferred learning style, like using pictures for visual learners or lectures for auditory learners, they learn better. But here's the catch: science doesn't actually back this up. Why don't learning styles work? Well, let's break it down. The idea of learning styles feels intuitive because we all have preferences for how we like to learn. Maybe you enjoy watching videos while your friend prefers taking notes. But studies have shown that tailoring teaching to these preferences doesn't improve learning outcomes. One big meta-analysis by Pasha et al. In 2009 looked at this myth. They reviewed a bunch of experiments and found no reliable evidence that matching teaching methods to learning styles actually help students learn better. In fact, what really mattered was the content being taught and the method for learning. For example, if you're learning geometry, diagrams and visuals make sense. But if you're studying poetry, listening to it might be more effective. There is no adequate evidence base to justify incorporating learning style assessments into general educational practice. So why are learning styles so popular? Well, it's because it feels personal. When someone says, "I'm a visual learner," it feels like they're understood. But Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa explains that the brain doesn't work in these isolated boxes. Instead, it combines information from all our senses to make sense of the world. Let's take reading as an example. When you read a book, your brain processes the visual parts, which are the words on the pages, but it also connects to your memory to make sense of the story, and sometimes even activates emotional areas if the story is really good. Learning is way more complex than just one style. So what does work? Research points to teaching strategies that engage multiple senses. Judy Willis talks about this in her work. She says that pairing visuals with words or using interactive activities help activate more areas of the brain, which makes learning stick. To quote Judy, "The brain learns best when it integrates information across multiple channels." Another effective strategy is retrieval practice. This means testing yourself on what you've learned, like using flashcards or quizzes. Daniel Willingham explains that the act of recalling information strengthens those brain pathways, making it easier to remember later. Memory is the residue of thought. We remember what we deeply process, not how information was presented. So the key takeaway, learning styles might sound nice, but they don't hold up scientifically. Instead of focusing on whether someone is a visual or auditory learner, the best approach is to mix it up. Use visuals, discussions, hands-on activities, and practice. The more you engage your brain, the better you'll learn. Myth number 3, left-brained versus right-brained learning dominance. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm creative because I'm right-brained," or "I'm logical because I'm left-brained"? This idea has been floating around for years, that one side of your brain controls certain traits like logic or creativity. But here's the truth, it's a myth. Your brain doesn't work that way. So where does this myth come from? Back in the 1960s, a neuroscientist named Roger Sperry studied people who had their brain hemispheres separated to treat epilepsy. He discovered that the left hemisphere handles things like language, while the right hemisphere is better at spatial tasks. Sounds cool, right? But here's the thing. Those two sides of the brain are constantly talking to each other through something called the corpus callosum. Almost everything you do involves both hemispheres working together. A more recent study by Nielsen et al. Looked at brain scans of over 1,000 people. They found no evidence that anyone is left-brained or right-brained. Instead, they discovered that connectivity across the brain is really what mattered for learning and creativity. To quote Nielsen et al. In 2013, there is no evidence for left brain or right brain dominance. Why does the myth stick around? Well, the left brain and right brain idea is popular because it's simple and catchy. People like the idea of being either logical or creative. It feels like a personality quiz. But Judy Willis explains that this oversimplifies how the brain works. She says that the tasks like problem solving or writing involve both hemispheres working together. For example, writing an essay might use the left hemisphere for grammar, but the right hemisphere for creativity. Your brain is like a team. The left and right hemispheres have different strengths, but they work together on almost everything. For instance, when you solve a maths problem, the left side might handle the calculations, while the right side visualizes the relationship between the numbers. This teamwork makes it possible for us to think both critically and creatively. Michael Gazzaniga, one of the pioneers of split brain research, emphasizes that cognitive flexibility, or our ability to switch between logic and creativity, comes from this collaboration. So next time you're doing something logical or creative, remember it's not one side of your brain, it's both. Key takeaway, the idea of left or right brain dominance is outdated. Whether you're solving problems or creating art, your brain is working as a whole. So don't box yourself into one category. You're capable of being both logical and creative because your brain is a team player. And that's a wrap on debunking these common neuromyths. Remember, understanding how your brain really works can transform the way you learn and grow. So ditch the myths, embrace the science, and keep challenging your brain to do amazing things.